The Great Hall of the Galactic Scholarly Council stretched across 3 kilometers of floating crystal platforms. Representatives from 217 species had gathered for what many considered the most prestigious academic competition in known space. The decennial translation trial brought together the finest linguistic minds from every corner of the galaxy. This year's challenge had drawn particular attention because the artifact was genuinely ancient, predating even the oldest spacefaring civilizations by millions of years. Coordinator Vexithalis, a crystalline from the Prism Collective, floated to the central podium. Her body refracted light in patterns that conveyed both excitement and solemnity. Distinguished scholars, we present to you a fragment recovered from the dead world of Theron 9. Carbon dating places this artifact at approximately 47 million standard years old. The writing system has never been catalogued. Your task is simple in description but monumental in execution. Interpret the text. A holographic display materialized above the podium, showing a stone tablet covered in strange symbols. The marks were precise and deliberate, clearly the work of intelligent beings. They flowed in patterns that suggested both mathematical precision and artistic beauty. Gasps echoed through the hall as scholars from various species activated their translation matrices and linguistic processors. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in the human delegation's modest section. Unlike the representatives from major powers who occupied entire platforms, humanity had been granted only 3 seats. Humans were still considered newcomers to galactic society, having achieved faster-than-light travel merely 2 centuries ago. Most species politely tolerated human presence at such events, while privately considering them too primitive to contribute meaningfully. Sarah studied the symbols on the display. She had spent her entire career researching dead languages, from ancient Sumerian to the extinct tongues of 3 alien civilizations. Something about these symbols felt familiar, though she couldn't immediately place why. She pulled out her personal tablet and began sketching the characters by hand, a habit her colleagues found charmingly primitive. The first competitor approached the podium. Ambassador Crixtal of the Mentari Collective was a being of pure thought energy contained in a crystalline matrix. The Mentari were considered the galaxy's foremost linguists, their consciousness capable of processing millions of linguistic patterns simultaneously. The symbols clearly represent a base 12 mathematical notation system, Crixtal announced, their voice resonating directly in every being's mind. The text describes astronomical coordinates, specifically the position of their home star relative to the galactic core. I have translated the numerical values and can provide precise locations. Polite acknowledgement rippled through the crowd. A mathematical interpretation was solid and defensible. The Mentari had set a high standard. Next came Scholar Vreen of the Tesserae Combine. The Tesserae were biological computers, their neural networks spanning across multiple bodies that thought as one. We propose an alternative interpretation, the collective voice announced. The symbols represent chemical formulas. The text is a recipe for a compound that may have been significant to their species, perhaps a medicine or a ceremonial substance. More acknowledgement. Another reasonable interpretation backed by logical analysis. Competitors continued presenting their findings. The Krillian mathematician proposed the text was a proof of a complex theorem. The Vorath psychohistorian believed it was a record of political treaties. The Zalathi soundweaver interpreted it as musical notation for a ceremonial song. Each interpretation was sophisticated and internally consistent. Each drew on the presenting species' particular strengths and cultural frameworks. Each was completely different from the others. Sarah continued sketching. She had filled several pages now, copying the symbols over and over, letting her hand feel the flow of the marks. There was something in the way the lines curved, the way certain symbols seemed to connect to others. It reminded her of something she had studied decades ago on Earth. The human delegation may present if they wish, Coordinator Vexithalis announced. There was a hint of condescension in her light patterns, a polite suggestion that the humans should simply observe rather than embarrass themselves. Sarah's colleagues looked at her nervously. Dr. James Wong whispered, "We don't have to present. No one expects us to compete with a Mentari or a Tessari." But Sarah was already standing. She walked to the podium carrying only her pencil and notebook. No translation matrix, no quantum linguistic processor, no neural enhancement technology. Several delegates made sounds that translated roughly to amusement or pity. She looked at the holographic display, then at her sketches. The feeling of familiarity had grown stronger as she worked. Now she understood why. "Before I offer an interpretation," Sarah said, "I have a question for the Council. Do you have access to the original artifact, or only this holographic reproduction?" Coordinator Vexithalis flickered with surprise. "The original is housed in our preservation vault. It is too fragile for direct handling." "Why do you ask?" "Because I need to see how the marks were made," Sarah replied. "I need to see the texture of the stone, the depth of the cuts, the angle of the strokes." Confused murmuring spread through the hall. Why would the physical characteristics of the writing matter? The symbols were the same regardless of medium. "This is highly irregular," Vexithalis said. "The holographic reproduction is accurate to the molecular level." "Please," Sarah said. "I promise my question is relevant." After a lengthy deliberation, the Council agreed to display the original artifact within a protective field. The stone tablet materialized on the podium, ancient and worn but still bearing its mysterious marks. Sarah leaned close, studying the carved lines with intense focus. She examined how the grooves began and ended, how they curved and intersected. A smile slowly spread across her face. "I need to ask one more question," she said. "May I demonstrate something? I will need a writing implement and a suitable surface." More confusion, more murmuring, but curiosity had been piqued. A tablet of soft clay was provided, along with a simple stylus. Sarah took the stylus and held it up for all to see. "Original script?" she asked. "Or enhanced?" The question made no sense to most observers, but something in Sarah's tone suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. The great hall fell silent, waiting to see what this strange human would do next. Coordinator Vexithalis consulted with her fellow council members through rapid light exchanges. "We do not understand your question, Dr. Chen. What do you mean by original script or enhanced?" Sarah smiled. "Allow me to demonstrate both, and then I will explain." She positioned the stylus above the clay tablet. "First, the original script." She began to write. Her hand moved quickly and confidently, carving symbols into the soft surface. They weren't the same symbols as on the ancient artifact, but they followed a similar pattern, flowing cursive marks that connected and curved. When she finished, she held up the tablet for all to see. "This is English written in a style called cursive. It says, 'Hello, we come in peace.' Now observe the strokes. See how they flow together, how each letter connects to the next. Notice where the stylus pressed deep and where it lifted. These physical characteristics reveal how the writing was produced." She took a fresh tablet. "Now, enhanced." This time she wrote differently. Each letter was separate, carefully formed, almost mechanical in its precision. The same words appeared, but they looked completely different. Blocky, deliberate, calculated. This is the same message in printed English, same language, same meaning, but completely different appearance. If you had only the printed version, you might never realize that cursive existed. You might never understand that these were once flowing connected marks made by a hand in motion. Understanding began to dawn on some delegates. Others remained confused. Sarah turned back to the ancient artifact. "Your interpretations were all logical and well-reasoned. Mathematical notation, chemical formulas, musical scores. But you all made the same fundamental assumption. You assumed this was a formal document, carved carefully and precisely for the purpose of preservation. A record meant to survive. But look at the strokes. She pointed to specific marks on the stone. See how this line starts thick and ends thin? That's called tapering. It happens when you lift your writing implement at the end of a stroke. See how these two symbols connect here? That's called a ligature. It happens when you don't lift your tool between marks. And here, see this slight wobble? That's not damage from age. That's natural variation from organic movement. The hall was completely silent now. This isn't a formal record, Sarah continued. This is handwriting. Personal handwriting. Someone carved these marks quickly and naturally, the same way I write notes to myself. This is informal communication, and that changes everything about how we should interpret it. Ambassador Crickstall's crystalline matrix flickered with agitation. Even if your analysis of the physical production is correct, how does that change the meaning? The symbols remain the same. No, Sarah said, they don't. Because when we recognize this as personal handwriting, we recognize something else. The marks that look like mathematical notation, those aren't numbers. They're abbreviations, shorthand. The writer shortened common words to save time, the same way humans write you instead of you in quick messages. And these symbols that look like chemical formulas, they're not compounds, they're names, personal names with titles or honorifics attached. She began pointing to specific sections of the artifact. This symbol that scholar Crickstall interpreted as the number 12 in base notation is actually the abbreviation for a word meaning friend or companion. I know this because it appears with slightly different endings in different contexts. The way names change form in languages with case systems. This symbol that Tessari identified as hydrogen is actually a diminutive prefix, something you add to a name to show affection or familiarity. How can you possibly know this? Demanded Scholar Vreen. You have no database of this language. You have no quantum analysis of the symbol patterns. No, Sarah admitted. But I have something else. I have spent my entire life studying how people write. Not just what they write, but how they write it. Every civilization that develops writing goes through similar stages. They start with pictographs, then develop syllabaries or alphabets, then create formal and informal registers. They develop abbreviations and shorthand. They develop different scripts for different purposes. The physical evidence on this artifact tells me exactly where this civilization was in that development. She lifted her pencil and notebook. I also have these. When you copy something by hand, over and over, you begin to feel its rhythm. You begin to understand the motions that created it. I have copied these symbols hundreds of times in the past few hours, and I can feel how the writer's hand moved. I can feel where they paused and where they rushed. I can feel their personality in the strokes. Coordinator Vexathalis leaned forward, her light patterns showing intense interest. If your analysis is correct, Dr. Chen, what does the text actually say? Sarah took a deep breath. It's a letter, a personal letter from one individual to another. It starts with a greeting that includes the recipient's name with an affectionate prefix. Then it contains what appear to be personal updates, things the writer has been doing or thinking about. There are references to shared experiences and inside jokes that we can't fully understand without more context, and it ends with a farewell that expresses hope for future communication. She paused, letting the implications sink in. This wasn't a monument. It wasn't a record. It wasn't meant to survive 47 million years. It was just a letter from someone to someone they cared about, and somehow, through impossible odds, it survived long enough for us to find it. Silence held the great hall. Then slowly, questions began to emerge from the delegates. How could she be certain of her interpretation? What evidence could she provide beyond her intuition? How could hand-copying symbols possibly provide linguistic insight? Sarah answered each question calmly and thoroughly. She explained the principles of paleography, the study of historical handwriting. She showed how physical analysis of stroke production could reveal information invisible to purely symbolic analysis. She demonstrated how comparing the same writer's variations of the same symbol could reveal underlying patterns. As she spoke, something remarkable began to happen. Other delegates started looking at the artifact differently. They began to see what she saw. The Mentari ambassador requested a magnified view of the stroke characteristics. The Tesserae scholar asked for analysis of the carving depth variations. Even the skeptics were intrigued. But one crucial question remained unanswered. Even if Sarah's analysis of the writing style was correct, how could she prove her interpretation of the meaning? Anyone could claim that symbols meant anything. The true test of a translation was whether it could predict patterns in new data. "There is one way to verify my analysis," Sarah said. "If I'm correct that this is personal correspondence, then the writer would follow consistent patterns. Greetings at the beginning, farewells at the end, personal content in between. I can identify which symbols I believe serve these functions. If you have any other artifacts from this civilization, even fragments, I can predict which elements will appear and where." The council members exchanged looks. They did have other artifacts. They had kept them in reserve specifically to test the competitors' translations. Coordinator Vexithales made a decision. "We will present the additional artifacts. You will have 1 hour to analyze them and provide predictions. If your predictions prove accurate, we will know your method has merit. If they fail, we will know your interpretation is merely imaginative speculation." Sarah nodded. She had gambled everything on her approach. Now she would discover if her instincts were correct, or if she had just embarrassed humanity in front of the entire galaxy. The additional artifacts materialized before her. 3 more fragments, all in varying states of preservation. Sarah picked up her pencil and began to sketch. The fate of her reputation, and perhaps humanity's standing in galactic academia, rested on what she found in the ancient strokes. Sarah worked in focused silence while the hour counted down. The 3 new artifacts presented different challenges. The first was badly damaged, with only fragments of symbols visible. The second was complete but much shorter than the original tablet. The third was longer but written in a different hand. The strokes formed differently, though the symbols were the same. Around her, the delegates watched with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. Some discussed her method in hushed tones. Many believed she was wasting time with her primitive pencil and paper. How could hand copying compare to quantum linguistic analysis? But Sarah wasn't just copying. She was feeling. Every stroke she drew told her something about the person who made it 47 million years ago. The first fragment showed the same tapering patterns and ligatures as the original. Same writer, she concluded, or at least someone trained in the same scribal tradition. The second tablet had similar characteristics, but with subtle differences. Same period, same cultural context, but a different individual with different motor habits. The third artifact was the most interesting. The handwriting was completely different. Heavier strokes, less elegant ligatures, a tendency to overlap symbols rather than connect them smoothly. This was someone who had learned to write later in life, she realized. The mechanical patterns of someone who had mastered the symbols but not the fluid motion that came from years of practice. With 15 minutes remaining, Sarah began to formulate her predictions. "For the first fragment," she announced, "I predict this is another personal letter from the same individual who wrote the original tablet. The greeting symbols should appear at the top, though they are partially damaged. I predict that what remains of the second line is a personal name with the same affectionate prefix we saw before. This person was writing to the same recipient." She moved to the second artifact. "This is a different type of document entirely. Notice how there are no greeting symbols and no farewell symbols. The text begins and ends abruptly. I predict this is not a letter, but a label or list. Perhaps an inventory, perhaps directions. Something purely functional that didn't require social formatting. Finally, she addressed the third artifact. This was written by someone else. Someone less practiced in the writing system. I predict this is a response to the original tablet. A letter from the recipient back to the sender. The greeting symbols should appear at the top, and I predict we will see a variation of the name from the original tablet because this writer would use the full formal version of their own name rather than the affectionate abbreviation. Coordinator Vex Thalas recorded the predictions. We will now analyze the artifacts using our most advanced linguistic mapping systems. Your predictions will be compared against our findings. The next hour felt like an eternity. The Council's systems processed the artifacts in ways Sarah could never match. They measured the precise angles of every stroke. They calculated the statistical distribution of every symbol. They compared patterns against databases containing millions of known writing systems. Finally, the results were ready. For the first artifact, Coordinator Vexithalis announced, our analysis confirms that the handwriting characteristics match the original tablet. The writer was the same individual or someone with identical training. Dr. Chen's prediction is confirmed. Sarah felt a small surge of hope. For the second artifact, our systems initially classified this as a formal document due to its brevity and structure. However, upon closer analysis, incorporating Dr. Chen's methodology, we find that the symbol distribution is inconsistent with formal registers. The text appears to be a list or inventory. Dr. Chen's prediction is confirmed. Hope grew stronger. For the third artifact, the handwriting analysis reveals a less skilled writer consistent with Dr. Chen's observation. The greeting symbols do appear at the beginning, and the name symbol, Vexithalis paused, her light patterns conveying amazement, is indeed a variation of the name from the original tablet, a full formal version rather than an abbreviation. Dr. Chen's prediction is confirmed in all particulars. The Great Hall erupted, not in cheers or celebration, because most species present didn't express themselves that way, but the air filled with electromagnetic pulses, chemical signals, thought projections, and dozens of other forms of shocked communication. The human had done it. Through nothing but pencil sketches and intuition, she had outperformed quantum computers and hive minds. Ambassador Krickstall approached the podium. Dr. Chen, I must understand. How did you know? How could hand-copying symbols reveal information that our systems could not detect? Sarah considered the question carefully. Your systems are magnificent. They can analyze data in ways I cannot begin to comprehend, but they analyze symbols as abstract patterns. They process meaning as mathematical relationships. They do not understand what writing actually is. She held up her pencil. Writing is not just symbols. It is movement frozen in time. When I copy these marks by hand, I am not just reproducing shapes. I am recreating the movements that made them. And when I do that, I connect with the being who made the original marks. I feel their hesitations and their confidence. I feel their care and their haste. I feel their personality. She looked at the ancient tablet with something like affection. Whoever wrote this letter lived 47 million years ago. Their species is gone. Their world is dead. Everything they built has turned to dust. But in these strokes, they are still alive. Their hand still moves, their mind still thinks, and because I can feel that movement, I can begin to understand what they were thinking. Coordinator Vexithalis processed this for a long moment. You are saying that your biological limitations are actually advantages? That your primitive technology allows perception that our advanced systems cannot achieve? I am saying that different approaches reveal different truths, Sarah replied. Your quantum analysis can tell you exactly how wide each stroke is to the micrometer, but it cannot tell you that the writer was in a hurry when they wrote the last line. It cannot tell you that they pressed harder when writing the recipient's name, probably because that name carried emotional weight. It cannot tell you that this letter was written with love. She paused to let that sink in. The other interpretations were not wrong. The symbols can be analyzed mathematically. They can be mapped chemically. They can be rendered musically. But those analyses miss the point. This wasn't data to be decoded. This was a message to be felt. And feeling is something humans have been practicing for a very long time. The council deliberated for only a few minutes before announcing their decision. The translation trial was awarded to the human delegation. Dr. Sarah Chen had demonstrated a completely new approach to xenolinguistics, one that would be studied and developed for generations to come. But Sarah barely heard the announcement. She was still looking at the ancient tablet, at the strokes made by a hand that had turned to dust millions of years ago. She thought about the being who had written this letter, who had taken the time to express affection for someone they cared about. She thought about the recipient, who had written back in their less elegant hand, who had valued the letter enough to keep it. 47 million years. Entire galaxies had formed and died in that time. Species had risen and fallen. Stars had burned out. But this letter had survived. This tiny piece of personal communication had outlasted empires and civilizations, because that was what writing truly was. Not data storage, not information transfer. It was the desperate, beautiful attempt of mortal beings to reach across time and distance and connect with each other. It was the hope that someone, someday, would pick up the marks they made and feel what they felt. The other delegates began approaching Sarah with questions and congratulations. The Mentari wanted to learn her methodology. The Tessari wanted to collaborate on new research. Representatives from species she had never heard of expressed interest in humanity's unique perspective. But Sarah knew the truth. Humans weren't special because of superior intelligence or advanced technology. They were special because they had thousands of years of practice at this exact task. They had spent their entire history trying to understand dead languages and lost civilizations. They had developed empathy as a tool because they had no other way to bridge the gaps. Every time a human scholar had puzzled over cuneiform tablets or hieroglyphics or ancient Chinese oracle bones, they had been training for this moment. Every time a human had looked at marks made by hands long turned to dust and tried to feel the living person behind them, they had been developing a skill the galaxy had never considered. Humanity's contribution to galactic civilization would not be technology or mathematics or military might. It would be this: the ability to reach across millions of years and feel the hope of someone who just wanted to be understood. Sarah touched the protective field surrounding the ancient tablet. "I hear you," she whispered. "I understand." And somehow, across the impossible gulf of time and death, she felt sure that the ancient writer heard her too.